They laughed at my $80 dress. The day I put the federal paperwork on the table, the whole house was silent. In the first picture of our marriage, my husband was standing outside the frame. June heat pressed down on my parents' backyard until the plastic tablecloths stuck to our wrists. The Costco cake sweated under foil. Someone wrestled with a Bluetooth speaker that kept hiccuping between country and static. I kept my palm against Mason's forearm, feeling that steady, quiet warmth that had carried him through deserts I'd only ever seen on TV. When he leaned close, his breath smelled faintly of sawdust and sunscreen. "Tomorrow I'm on with Leonard," he said, low enough that the word didn't quite become a sound. I nodded, and the nod wasn't small. I'd already slid a rubber band around a stack of printouts at the bottom of my tote, each page nicked with a yellow tag. In pencil on the edge of the top sheet, I'd written the 2 words that mattered more than the bouquets and the brisket combined. Before I could think of something brave, Ethan lifted his champagne glass like he was calling a press conference. "To you two," he said, syrupy smooth. "May your love grow like weeds." Laughter spilled in waves, some mean, some polite, the kind that comes with a sideways glance to see who else is laughing. My mother touched her pearls and smiled without showing teeth. My father did the small, approving nod he saves for handshake deals and tires that kick back with just the right thunk. I swallowed air that tasted like hot plastic and smoke, and I didn't look at Ethan. I looked at Mason's hand. The knuckles were nicked and healing. He tapped his thumb twice against my wrist, a code we never named. "Here. With you. Now." Darius and a couple of Mason's old teammates drifted in and out of the shade, their polos wrinkling at the back where they'd been leaning into work earlier, the way men do when they can't stand being useless. One of them tried to open a trash bag and fought the wind for a full 30 seconds before laughing at himself. My mother watched them like a neighbor watches weather, uncertain which way to turn the chairs if a storm comes through. Lily stood on the steps with a bouquet of ditch flowers she'd gathered from the fence line, the stems wetting her fingers. I saw her look at me and then away, like glancing too long might break something fragile between us. The photographer, Dad's friend with a camera he loves more than his boat, began herding relatives into a wide half-circle in front of the flagstone. "Let's get the family," he called, voice good-natured and bossy. I felt the tug at my elbow, the polite pressure that positions women like vases on mantles. When I turned, I saw Mason take a small step back, not because he was told, but because he could feel the current and he didn't want me to get swept. The lens blinked, and in that blink, my husband became a border. Present, necessary, and somehow framed out. A click like a lock. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself there would be a second picture. Toasts kept happening. They blurred together. A joke about taxes, a joke about my practical taste, a joke about Costco cakes with surprisingly good frosting if you don't look too closely. Dad took the mic with a sigh that sounded like a decision he'd already made. "My daughter has always chosen the straightforward path," he said, the compliment wrapped in something heavier. "And she's chosen a man who knows what work means." The crowd said, the way crowds do when they agree they've heard something respectable. My throat tightened at the word straightforward. Straightforward like a line drawn between a small house and a small future and a set of small expectations you can dust on Sundays. Mason's palm anchored me to the table edge. "We're okay," he murmured. "We're better than okay." His voice carried zero defensiveness. It just sat beside me like a chair pulled up under a tired body. He reached for a plate, piled brisket on it, and then didn't eat. Just held it so I'd have something to hide my shaking behind. I'd put the printouts at the bottom of my tote that morning, a private charm against whatever pity I could smell brewing. Yellow tabs bit the edges at precise points, like teeth. The pencil note on the corner, those 2 words, burned through the canvas. A boundary line, a lock, a clause that said what was ours could not be pawned for somebody else's emergency. Ethan, reliably center stage, saw me looking down rather than up. "Don't worry," he called lightly, and people turned because they always do when he clears his throat. "We kept it simple for you." He gestured at the folding chairs, the paper plates, the uneven rows of solar lights along the fence. Simple has its charm. It wasn't the words. It was the way he made them a choice I'd failed rather than a choice I'd made. When I finally stood, I held a plastic cup of water like it was crystal. "Family," I said, and my voice didn't crack, "is knowing who stands by you when you need them." Nobody clapped. A child dropped a fork and it scissored across the concrete. Darius gave Mason a look that landed somewhere between apology and pride. Mason shrugged it off with an easy half-smile that said, "Don't spend your energy here." We returned to the business of pretending. The Bluetooth found a song that fit the hour. The breeze decided to help for once. Lily brought me a napkin and asked if I wanted to sneak out to the side yard where the hostas survived even the worst summers. "Later," I told her, and tucked the napkin into the waistband of my thrift store dress where the seam I'd resewn held firm. "You sure?" she whispered. And the question wasn't about the garden. Mom did that thing where she straightened something that wasn't crooked and whispered, "If you decide to go back to school in the fall, we could help a little." She meant we could help by telling you which classes are graceful for a woman who wants to be helpful rather than visible. I kept my eyes on her hands, smoothing air. "I haven't stopped learning," I said, and left it alone. She smiled the way people do when they think you've agreed. In the kitchen, I rinsed a knife that had been tasked with slicing cake far beyond its dignity. Mason came in behind me, his shoulder touching mine, the contact a relief I felt down to my toes. "We can leave in 10, he said. "Darius will finish." I looked out the window at the rows of raised beds we'd started at the property line. Nothing glamorous, just new soil that held moisture like a promise. 5, I said, and he laughed into his sleeve. At the door, Ethan blocked our path with a gentleness that always made me more tired than any fight would. "Don't disappear," he said, smiling like a man who knows how charming his teeth are. "We have to do the goodbyes." "We're not disappearing," I told him. "We're cleaning up." He glanced at my dress, at the hem I'd stitched after midnight 2 nights ago, and his smile twitched with the satisfaction of a diagnosis confirmed. Dusk made the cheap lights pretty. It tends to. The kids found a game in the dark that involved hiding behind lawn chairs and shrieking. Dad said something to Mason about football as if small talk could scrub a day clean. Mason answered in short sentences that didn't invite more. I took my tote from the chair and checked the weight with my palm the way you check a mailbox when you already know what's in there. Heavy. Reassuring. We carried the last bag of trash to the curb, and I let my feet feel the grit of the driveway through thin soles. There was a kind of freedom in not spending all your money on a day people would forget by Monday. There was another kind in refusing to apologize for that. When we came back through the gate, the photographer called for one final shot, just the siblings. I stopped with my hand on the latch. Ethan had already taken his place in the middle, lily-white shirt, clean as a fresh check. Lily hovered half a step behind me. "You go," she said softly. "I'll take it." "No," I said, and walked over and stood where the camera wanted me, and turned my face so the profile it caught belonged to someone I recognized. The shutter answered like a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished writing. The evening thinned. Goodbyes had that long Midwestern drag. 3 in the yard, 2 on the steps, 1 at the car door, just when you think you're free. Mason and I stacked chairs in the truck bed. He hopped up, then immediately hissed through his teeth when his knee reminded him of physics. "Hey," I said, steadying the leg of a chair. "You don't have to prove anything here." "I know," he said. And the "I know" wasn't bitter. He handed me the last chair like passing a baton in a race we were running together. We were almost to the cab when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my dress. The screen glowed my brother's name. The message filled a single bubble, neat, efficient, like a calendar invite dropped into a life. Ethan's text. "Family dinner next Saturday. Very important." Both of you remember it's not the photo, it's who got cut out of the frame. That night, my brother put the valuation of my life in the middle of the dinner table. Ashbury Hills wore its money like a cologne, subtle from a distance, suffocating up close. The driveway curved so long I checked twice to make sure we weren't lost. Every porch lantern had the same soft, curated glow, like a showroom that had learned to breathe. Inside, the air tasted of citrus polish and an argument nobody wanted to name. Someone had laid out a runner down the foyer, a narrow river of beige that told you where to step if you enjoyed getting it right. I carried a small notebook in my bag, the kind you can palm if you don't want to make a point yet. Between the pages, a crooked tab stuck out. On it, in my own pencil, I had scratched 2 small spells, the ones that kept our house standing. Non-transfer/no encumbrance. I didn't need to look at the words to know they were there. I liked the weight of them anyway. The hallway to the dining room was a museum of versions of us, hung in straight lines. A toddler Ethan in a sweater with ducks, a teenage me with a haircut I thought would save me from myself. My parents posed in front of a rental beach house as if they owned the tide. Then Thanksgiving, last year's picture, everyone arranged like they'd been places by a grid you couldn't see. I could. My fingernail found the corner of the frame and ticked there, a metronome for a song I didn't want to learn. Mason wasn't in the photo, not cropped, not blurred, not missed on accident, absent by design. I felt the tiny nick my nail made in the varnish and let it be. Lily brushed my elbow when she came to stand beside me, her hair still carrying the smell of the cold outside. "He's been scrambling since the quarter closed," she said, not looking directly at the wall. Tight cash, tighter face. I didn't ask who the he was. The house answered that on its own. The dining room had the acoustics of a place that expects applause. A table long enough to require strategy, candlesticks tall enough to turn shadows into columns. Ethan was already at the head, jacket off but cuffs crisp, hosting like a man who believed a chair could be a throne if you held your back exactly right. A friend hovered at his right shoulder with the kind of haircut that tells you he charges by the quarter hour. "This is Tyler," Ethan said, smooth. "He's in finance." The way he said "in" made it sound like a country you needed a passport to visit. "Family first," Ethan began before the salad plates had fully landed. He said the phrase as if he'd invented it, as if he had licensed the right to use it as punctuation. "We're in a passing storm," he continued. "Every family faces one. The smart ones think long-term." He reached for the wine and paused politely to pour for my mother, who leaned into the glass with gratitude and a tremor. "The good news," he went on, "is we have assets in the family that aren't fully optimized." "Optimized," my father repeated, pleased with the mouthfeel. Tyler offered a smile you could have stapled to a brochure. "Liquidity," he said vaguely, "is not the same as value." He was speaking to no one and everyone. I cut a small square from the roast and put it down again. "We're fine," I said, because it was true. Not sleek, not insulated. Fine like a beam that doesn't groan under the weight it's supposed to carry. Crosswind is on plan. We have— "Don't do that thing," Ethan said, amiable, palms up, "where you make it about your little project. This is bigger. This is family." He looked down the table at our parents, who obliged him with solemn nods as if a baton had just been passed and they knew to conduct. Mason's knee brushed mine under the table. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't lean forward. He simply existed at a temperature that suggested survival, and it cooled the back of my neck. "Here's what makes sense," Ethan said, and I recognized the tone as the one he used when he was about to tell a roomful of people to clap. "You and Mason have land. You have fledgling operations. It's all very admirable. We, on the other hand, are navigating a temporary pinch. If we leverage what you have, short-term, we lift all boats. We avoid any unpleasantness, I echoed, because the word was a costume that didn't fit the body. Like foreclosure? Or like headlines? Don't be dramatic, Ethan said, and laughed as if he'd generously included me in a joke. I'm talking about a line of credit, secured in a way that lets us keep the optics clean. You have to think of the family name. The family name, my mother repeated, as though it were a fragile heirloom only some of us had been trusted to dust. Tyler clasped his hands. From an asset management perspective, you're underutilized. Mason's fork made a neat sound against his plate and then went silent. He looked at me, and in that look I heard the earlier whisper, "Tomorrow I'm on with Leonard." Not a threat, not a promise, a fact with a spine. I asked for the salt, though the food didn't need it, just to move my hand and feel I still had one. We can't use our property as your umbrella, I said quietly. It's spoken for. By who? Ethan said, almost kindly. By your hobby garden? Claire, come on. The table leaned toward him as if he were a hearth. I found the seam on the tablecloth and pressed it flat with my thumb. By paper that matters. Paper only matters, he said, if it can be. He made a fluttering motion. Arranged. Mason, still calm. Some paper doesn't flutter. A small clang came from the kitchen, and my mother seized the moment, standing, all flutter, to fetch more bread. She caught my sleeve as I followed to help and tugged me into the doorway where the hallway swallowed us. The light was different there, colder, honest. Sweetheart, she said, the word urgent and brittle. Your brother is drowning. He can swim, I said. He built a pool. She flinched. He carries this family's reputation. He makes us look like... She waved at the ceiling, the crown molding, the hidden speakers piping in tasteful jazz. People who did something right. You are good, but good doesn't hold a roof when it rains. She reached for my hand, then for my shoulder when I didn't give it. It is your duty to help him. With my life? I asked. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. I saw the question land and wobble in her eyes, as if she had never considered that duty might require blood rather than casseroles. He will fix it, she insisted, lower now. He just needs time. And a gesture. Families make gestures. Gestures, I said, feeling the soft corners of the notebook in my bag like a stone I could choose to put in my pocket or throw through a window. He wants signatures. She didn't answer. The truth doesn't need dialogue to be true. We returned to the table with our faces smoothed. Plates had shifted like continents. My father had found a story about a man he once knew who made and lost and made again. Tyler nodded in the intervals, his eyes doing math. Ethan waited until our chairs settled before laying his hand flat in the center of the maple, the way a dealer claims the felt before the last card. Let's stop circling, he said, charming as a salesman at the threshold. He slid a thick folder from beneath his chair and set it on the runner. The weight of it found the wood like a verdict. Independent appraisal, he announced, and the word independent did a little trick with its hat. He opened to a page thick with numbers and clean decimals. Just a few signatures, I'll take care of the rest. The room adjusted around the words. My father's jaw did that tightening that could be mistaken for resolve. My mother touched the edge of the page as if to test whether ink could bite. Tyler angled the paper toward himself without touching it, like a man who knows fingerprints are for other people. Mason didn't move. I watched the column of valuations, the tidy list that translated ounces of sun and inches of rain and hours of unpaid work into something a bank could love for a moment. It would have been impressive if it hadn't made my skin feel too tight. It's generous, Ethan said, with the confidence of a man awarding himself a gold star. I pushed for the higher comps. Because that's what I do for family. You're generous, I said, with things that aren't yours. He spread his hands. It becomes mine for a little while, then it goes back. That's how it works. Things don't have to come back the way they left, Mason said softly, looking not at the numbers but at me. Ethan sighed the sigh of a patient teacher. Look, nobody's talking about selling. This is leverage, temporary. We smooth this quarter, we keep the house, the market rebounds, we unwind, and we all get to the spring with the same last name. The same last name, my mother echoed, and I felt a small, ridiculous urge to check my driver's license. Claire, Tyler tried, so pleasant you could wrap a gift in his tone. The terms are clean. This would be painless if you— Painless, I said, is what you call it when you don't plan to feel it. He blinked, recalibrated, smiled again. Ethan pushed the appraisal an inch closer, the paper hissing a little against the runner, then tapped the signature line with his index finger. Just be practical. It's who you are. I remembered the wall of photographs. I remembered where I had put my finger, where I had counted off absence like beats in a bar. I remembered the small pencil letters on a yellow tab hidden in a notebook against my hip. I looked at my brother's face and saw a man who had mistaken the ability to arrange furniture for the right to own the house. I closed the folder and slid it back to him with 2 fingers, as if returning cutlery. We'll think about it, I said, and tasted the lie long enough to be sure it wouldn't poison me. We'll talk. We'll call dinner ended in the way rich dinners do, with coffee and a dessert that wanted to be photographed and nobody hungry enough to finish it. The hallway's river of beige carried us toward the door in a slow, obedient tide. My father patted my shoulder like a coach who knows which kid will run the extra lap. My mother kissed my cheek too hard and too close to my eye. Lily pretended to study a painting near the exit to hide the fact that her jaw had been clenched all night. Outside, the air had turned the kind of cold that polishes everything sharp. The driveway lamps hummed. Mason popped the trunk of our truck and lifted out a thick, battered folder that looked as if it had been stacked and unstacked so many times the cardboard had learned our fingerprints. He put it into my hands and didn't let go until he was sure I had it, until the full weight transferred. Open it when you get home, he said. You need to know all the terms before they call again. Ethan brought the valuation to my house. I brought the feds to your desk. I loaded each gold tab this morning. Light slid across the kitchen tiles in a thin gray sheet, the kind of winter light that refuses to commit. Our wooden table was no longer a table. It was a runway of paper. I'd stacked the folders by height and heat. On top, the yellow tabs gleamed like brass cartridges. Mason ran a finger along a line I'd underlined last night. Grant code, subclause B. The one with the word that matters more than any speech. Non-transfer. Right there, he said, not as instruction but as confirmation, like tapping a stud behind drywall. I texted Leonard, if they come, sit at the table. He replied with a time and a single checkmark that somehow felt like a door clicking into place. We had set 3 folding chairs to face the door. Not dramatic, practical. I brewed coffee because it made the room smell like a decision. Lily arrived with her satchel and the laser printer humming inside it, cords peaking like nervous veins. She set down a stapler, a highlighter, a roll of tape. I'll minute whatever needs minutes, she said, sounding like a secretary and a sister at the same time. And I pulled the emails you asked for. She held up a black and white printout with a yellow streak across a single sentence that could make or unmake the rest. When the doorbell rang, it didn't ring timid. Ethan entered with politeness lacquered on, like a coat so fresh it would smudge if you touched it. Behind him, a junior lawyer in a narrow tie carried a briefcase that looked like it cost too much to risk on our porch. My parents trailed after, faces studied into neutrality, the way people look before a family photo they know they'll hate later. I gestured to the chairs. "Sit," I said. Not hostile, not warm. The printer in Lily's bag clicked, like an animal swallowing. "You didn't have to make this formal," Ethan said, half-smiled, doing outreach. "We're family." "Formality's what keeps family from breaking the house," Mason said mildly, and moved a coaster closer to Ethan's elbow in case he didn't see it. "Let's just get through the options," Ethan continued, already reaching for the same folder he'd used last night, like a magician reusing a deck. No reason to overcomplicate. He put the appraisal on the wood and looked to my parents for affirmation. They offered it like a practiced chorus. Small nods, the mercy of silence. Leonard came in on the second chime, snow shaken from his shoulders, tie loosened to exactly the degree that says, "I work for you, not your fear." He didn't sit until we did. He set a thinner folder on top of Ethan's appraisal, aligning the top edges carefully. The top page was crisp and patient. "Before we discuss any options," Leonard said, "we should read the status of the asset." He tapped the header with his pen. Grant A, executed Quarter 2. Grant B, executed Quarter 3, both in good standing, both with compliance up to date. Pilot contract, Crosswind Applied Ag, explicitly states no encumbrance during term. That's not a recommendation. That's a prohibition, Tyler Jr., the lawyer. Cleared his throat as if to launder his youth. Prohibitions can be negotiated around with consent from, "Not this one," Leonard said, turning the page. "Non-transfer. No liens, no pledges, no mortgages, no security interests. You can't even pretend the idea without tripping a wire." Ethan smiled wider, the way men do when they can't believe you brought rules to a feelings fight. "Claire, we're not here to steal. We're here to protect. Your land keeps value because men like me defend it from men like them." He angled his chin toward the window, toward a world he preferred to treat as dangerous so he could justify standing in front of it. "We're here," I said, "because you brought a valuation to my dinner table like it was a wedding gift." He spread his hands. "Independent appraisal. Fair market. If you sign a temporary like a tourniquet," Mason said, "on somebody else's limb." My father finally spoke, voice gravel made sentimental for the occasion. "Ethan's just asking for a bridge. We did bridges for you children all the time." "You built a dock," I said. "We learned to swim." Leonard flipped to the draft patent and slid it to the middle. "Well, we're here," he said, academic in his neatness. "Crosswind's filings are in order. Provisional submitted, continuations mapped. A commercialization roadmap is attached. It includes key counterparties and confidentiality provisions. Any public statement that misrepresents these facts," he looked at the junior, "becomes interesting." Ethan interlaced his fingers. "No one is misrepresenting anything." He leaned, that posture of earned impatience. "We are trying to solve a short-term problem without turning our last name into an auction item. Claire, sign. Mason, let your pride eat in the garage for 1 week. I will take care of the rest. You can go back to compost and seed trays and being noble." Mason didn't blink. "I'd rather be noble than solvent and rotten." Lily slid a page to my elbow without looking at anyone directly, the way a good card dealer makes the table believe the card was always yours. I kept my fingers on the edge like it might fly away. "Before we go farther," I said, "there's something you should see." I placed the printout on top of his appraisal, aligning corners so the headline dates met like foreheads. The yellow highlighter band glowed across a sentence in an email thread Ethan thought he'd sent into a small, safe circle. "If the piece lands Friday, we bet against Crosswind into the weekend and cover into Monday." My mother inhaled a little sound you could mistake for a cough if you wanted to protect her from herself. My father's jaw set until the tendons drew a map. The junior lawyer's eyes flicked, calculating not law but angles. Ethan's smile stayed, but it emptied out behind the teeth. "Locker room talk," he said softly. "People say sports metaphors. It's not the metaphor, I said. It's the preposition. He finally looked at me instead of through me. What do you want, Claire? A confession? A scene? You think I'm the villain in your farm diary? I want the same thing I've always wanted. This family not to drown in the shallow end because someone refused a flotation device out of principle. You don't need saving, I said. You want me to go down with you. Silence unrolled. It wasn't a dramatic silence. It was the kind that follows a lever being thrown, the seconds before a machine decides which way to grind. Leonard clicked his pen closed, an audible period. Given the current legal status, he said, as if he were reading from the law itself and not from our table, the proposal is void. It cannot be accepted, executed, or even contemplated without violating federal terms and exposing the signatories to penalties that make this conversation look quaint. If your concern is family reputation, the best strategy is to stop testing whether gravity applies in this zip code. Tyler Jr. tried again, gamely. There are waivers. Not here, Leonard said. Not now. Not for this. My mother reached for Ethan's hand and missed. My father rubbed his temple like there might be a door there he could push through if he applied the right pressure. Lily looked up at me and down again so quickly it felt like a secret handshake. Ethan's patience thinned enough to show its scaffolding. The family needs your signature, he said, dropping please to prove he'd used it already. The current legal status does not allow it, Leonard replied, tone dry as a docket. The proposal is void. Ethan leaned back and laughed once, the kind of laugh that comes from a throat, not a chest. You called a lawyer for a family talk. He turned to my parents. Do you see what we're dealing with? We're dealing with a contract, I said, and reached to straighten the pages even though they didn't need straightening. I could feel the heat of the appraisal under my palm as if money could generate weather. He stood. The chair legs skated an inch on tile and squealed. You don't sign today? He bent his head the slightest. You won't like what your little friends read about you tomorrow. If they're little, Mason said, voice so even it sounded like kindness. Why are you afraid of them? Ethan didn't answer that. He turned to the junior lawyer who slid the appraisal back into the folder with the neatness of someone who cleans crime scenes for a living. My parents stood because the air told them to. At the threshold, Ethan looked over his shoulder and gave me the smile he gives cameras and waiters he likes. Last chance to be reasonable. Reasonable, I said, is a place where the floor doesn't give. He left a degree colder than he'd arrived. The door shut with a click that felt like a stamp. For a minute we stayed exactly where we were, arranged by impact. Then Mason exhaled and tipped his head toward the coffee like we were only halfway through a normal morning. Lily checked the printer, tore away a ragged strip of paper that had tried to jam, and fed it into the recycling with the tenderness of someone tucking a blanket. My phone buzzed. New email. Subject line, notice. The sender, the junior lawyer whose tie had been tighter than his case. The body used 5 paragraphs to say almost nothing. The words cease and desist appeared twice, flanked by vagueness and bolded to look brave. I read it again, and set the phone down face up like a card that had no trick left in it. Ethan grits his teeth. If you don't sign today, there will be another story on the financial pages tomorrow. As soon as they left, an email from Ethan's young lawyer came in. Vague, cease and desist. Weak threat. I muttered, okay. See you in the paper. They sent cease and desist a scare last night. This morning, they sent the real story. The blog post went viral. Soldier PR. Grant was dirty. Company hype. Drizzle combed the street into thin, nervous lines, and the kitchen light turned our window into a pale mirror. I had 2 tabs open, one with a financial blog that loved its own cleverness, the other a blank document waiting for words that could stand upright in bad weather. The headline on the blog didn't waste time. a smirk dressed up as reporting, toggling between accusation and innuendo like a metronome. I took a long breath through my teeth, pressed Shift-Command-4, boxed the screen with the crosshairs, and dropped the screenshot into a folder already named Evidence. Then I scrolled slowly because I wanted to see how they built the scaffolding for a lie. Soldier PR, like serving your country is a marketing plan. Dirty grant, like money awarded through a process with more footnotes than a Bible verse could be swayed by a smile. Company hype, like we were inflating soil the way you can inflate air in a stock balloon.
They quoted nobody who mattered and everyone who liked the rush of being near a rumor. They asked questions with question marks they hoped readers would hear as periods. Under the byline, a link. Tip us. I didn't click it. I took another screenshot. I saved that one too. Mason came in with his hair damp from the walk to the mailbox and set the envelopes down without looking at them. He leaned over my shoulder, not to read, but to weigh the room's temperature. Red pin, he said softly, and I nodded. On the corkboard above the coffee maker, I pressed the red push pin back through the single page Leonard and I had refined the night before. A one-page press release in language so clear it couldn't be twisted without snapping. Statement of record. Compliance status. Active contracts. No encumbrance during term. Reporting channels for market manipulation. 4 sections. 4 doors a reader could walk through and come out informed instead of entertained. Newsroom? Mason asked, already waking the laptop at the end of the counter. The crosswind homepage loaded in a heartbeat. No hero image, no breathy copy. Just a clean grid like a workshop pegboard. Projects, papers, partners, newsroom. The cursor hovered over newsroom and waited like a diver poised. He didn't click. Not yet. My phone buzzed on the cutting board, jittering against a bruise from last night's cutting of lemons. Lily. Voice note. The one he bragged about setting the time. I downloaded it. A second bubble followed with a file icon, .m4a, clean as a pebble. I pressed play, kept the volume low. A man's voice, smooth with caffeine and control, half covering the smile that lived in the throat. Ethan. Countdown 3, 2, 1. Post. Place a counter order, a laugh you couldn't mistake for nerves. Then the shuffle of what might have been sleeves, and the recording ended. The kitchen's hum filled the space it left. My hand didn't shake. I scrubbed the cutting board and set the phone down on a paper towel like a small, obedient animal that had done its trick. We're not answering their story, I said to the sink in the room. We're stating facts. Good, Mason said. And it wasn't a pep talk. It was a confirmation, like tapping a fence post to make sure it was plumb. I opened the town's Facebook group because I knew we couldn't pretend the noise wasn't there. The link was already pinned near the top by a moderator who liked traffic more than moderation. The comments stitched themselves fast and dirty. So, we're just planting trees for grant money now? Soldier brand, classic. If they were legit, why no ribbon cuttings? Someone I recognized from the hardware store chimed in with a shrug emoji. I didn't reply. I took screenshots, timestamp included, and moved them to the same evidence folder. My thumb hovered over the keyboard once, tasting the thrill of a clapback. And then I went back to the press release. We don't argue in comment sections. We argue in documents. The phone rang, my mother's ringtone, a music box version of a hymn. Claire, she said without hello, your brother is on the verge of being humiliated. Can't you just... Mom, I said, not unkind. I'm writing a statement of record. You sound like a courthouse, she snapped, then softened because she knows softness works. Don't let strangers define our story. Then tell Ethan to stop feeding them chapters, I said. And when she inhaled to scold, I said, I have to go. Gently, like setting down a glass before it cracks. Leonard called as I was switching lines.
I put him on speaker and slid the draft into his voice. He listened in that lawyer way that is really a kind of engineering. "Cut the second adjective in paragraph 2, he said. "Keep verbs concrete. Add the reporting email for manipulation claims and put the grant numbers in a footnote. Make them do the work of Googling." I made the changes while he spoke. He said he'd file a courtesy copy to 2 places that could actually investigate and 3 that only pretend. "We're not threatening," he said. "We're documenting." Mason had already drafted the 2 sentences he'd been carrying around in his pocket like a talisman. He typed them into the CMS while I read the press release out loud one last time. "We don't plant crops by shortcuts. We don't build systems with tricks." He clicked publish and the page refreshed, and there they were in the top left corner of our small corner of the internet. 2 plain lines that sounded more like a pledge than a defense. I sent the press release to Leonard, to the town paper with a subject line that included the word statement, to 2 reporters who had asked real questions in the past, and to myself. The outbox word. The inbox answered back at once with the automated echo. "Received, ticket number." That small mercy of modern systems that says at least a robot is listening. The blog's comment count ticked upward. A second site scraped the post and dressed it in a headline with more teeth. An account that always tweeted at market open and close weighed in with a thread full of rhetorical questions, each one a hook designed for mouths. I kept my mouth closed. I added links to the evidence list. Lily sent another text. Posted the .m4a to a private drive with a checksum. Save copies offline. She added a heart and a lock. I replied with a period, our shorthand for scene held. Dad called, and when I didn't pick up the first time, he called again and again. Like knocking harder changes the door's mind. I answered on the 4th. "You can't put press releases on the internet and call it dignity," he said without preamble. "You talk to me." "You talk to your brother." "I did," I said. "He told me I'd like tomorrow's papers." Silence clothespinned the line. Then, more quietly, "You used to be able to take a joke." "This isn't a joke," I said, and he made an old man noise, the kind you hear when a body remembers pain on rainy mornings. When I hung up, the house had the strange stillness of a place between moves. It isn't rest. It's bracing. Mason refilled the coffee and didn't pretend to sip it. He took the printer cord from Lily and checked the plug because his hands like to fix something in the vicinity when the big thing can't be repaired in a day. I opened the voice note again and listened not for the words but for their seams. Any hesitation, any doubt, any context that could be claimed later as a joke or a draft or a hypothetical. It held together like a welded joint. Countdown, 3, 2, 1, post. Place a counterorder. The language of a person who believes time is something to be set and markets a toy that jiggles if you tap the table. I thought of the photo in the hallway last night, the one where absence looked like design. This too had been designed. Not a slip, a plan. I wrote the last line of the press release without adjectives. Crosswind Applied Ag operates under active grant and contract obligations that prohibit encumbrances and misrepresentation. Attempts to manipulate public perception for market impact will be documented and reported. I added the reporting address. I added the date. I added my name. Mason hit publish on the newsroom and then, because none of this counts if it lives in a corner, he copied the link to the simple social channels we kept only because people think a thing isn't real until they see it in a feed. The 2-sentence manifesto sat above it like a masthead. Within minutes, the town group had our link underneath the smear. A few of the same people who'd tossed emoji earlier tossed them again. A few changed their tone the way fish change direction when the boat turns. I took another screenshot. The rain slid down the window like a script that had started badly and might yet find its second act. "Eat," Mason said, placing a plate with toast and peanut butter by my elbow. Peanut butter is not victory food, but it lets the body remember its job. I took a bite, and the ordinary grounded everything again. The taste of salt, the stick of roof of mouth, the swallow. When Leonard called back, I picked up on the first ring. "Filed," he said. "2 regulatory inboxes, time-stamped. Also sent a courtesy note to the platform that ran the post, citing their own policy on market manipulation. Don't expect action. Do expect a log entry. Save the log." "Saved," I said. Lily had already set the automation. The receipts stacked on their own, neat as bricks. He hesitated, then said, "You sound steady." "I am," I said, and surprised myself with how true it felt. We let the room be quiet. The blog refreshed itself into a new spin. Update: Target denies allegations. We didn't respond to the update. We had already spoken once in complete sentences. The file icon on my phone still sat there like a lead bead. I pressed play again, one more time, not to rehear, but to memorize the rhythm so that later, in a room with bad coffee and fluorescent lights, I could recite it without ceremony. Countdown 3, 2, 1. Post. Place a counter order. My hand rested on the table. It was steady. I could have signed my name cleanly right then, but there was nothing to sign. The drizzle thickened and then thinned. The coffee cooled. The cursor blinked at the end of the press release as if asking if there would be a 7th paragraph. There wouldn't. We were done talking for the morning. Leonard's phone vibrates. The management agency pinged the pre-screening exchange schedule. They want to meet as soon as possible. Ethan thinks power is being on TV. I put terms on the table. That's power. A valuation can't beat a non-transfer line. By evening, the dining room had forgotten it was a place for meals and decided to be a room with rules. We pulled the leaf to full length and covered the wood with a runner so the paper wouldn't slide. Outside, rain slapped the window panes in sheets that came and went like crowds leaving a stadium. Mason checked the little Bluetooth speaker, then set it face down on a coaster as if sound could sweat. Lily arranged legal pads at 90 degrees and uncapped a pen like a metronome. Leonard stood at the hutch, reading quietly to himself, and then drew a precise line of highlighter across the phrase that holds like steel. Non-transfer / no encumbrance. The doorbell sounded with the breezy confidence of people who don't ring and wait anywhere else. Ethan came first, Rain shrugging off his coat as if it recognized better fabric. The junior lawyer followed, hair already perfect again, briefcase slick with droplets. My parents entered the way parishioners do on a Sunday when the sermon topic leaked early. Composed, braced, willing to be convinced if you make it easy on them. I gestured to chairs. Nobody joked about assigned seats. "Let's anchor the conversation," Leonard said, voice in that low register people use when they don't intend to be interrupted. He opened the first folder, Grant A, and set it in the center, then opened Grant B and overlapped them so the headers made a clean ladder. He flipped to the pilot contract, slid it into the top position, and held a fingertip over the clause. Project assets are in a legal state that cannot be mortgaged/transferred. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. During the term, no liens, pledges, mortgages, or security interests may be created, attempted, or suggested. Any such action would constitute a breach with penalties. He tapped the margin where he'd drawn the bright mark. This is not flexible language. The junior lawyer cleared his throat into a safer shape. There are circumstances in which parties can— "Not these parties," Leonard said, turning a page. "Not these terms. Not under active federal obligations." Ethan smiled like a man who has exchanged this exact smile for years and believes it still buys cooperation. "Claire," he said, palms open. "This theater is unnecessary. We have a simple ask. You and Mason secure a modest line against underused assets. We stabilize. You unwind. We never speak of it again. We remain a family that handled its business privately." "Privately," I said, "isn't the same as properly." My father curled his fingers around the back of his chair. Let's not get sanctimonious, he murmured. We're finding a bridge. Bridges are fine, Mason said, when they aren't built over someone else's lungs. I reached beneath the stack and found the folder Ethan had brought last night, its glossy weight unmistakable. I placed it at the bottom of our pile where it had waited all afternoon, a stone under a current. We'll do this in order, I said. Terms first. I slid the pilot contract so its clause sat exactly above the signature bars of his appraisal. Then comps and decimals. Ethan's gaze dipped in spite of himself. I felt the room register the geometry, the line that cancels the number. A valuation is a snapshot of a possibility, I said. This line is a door locked from the inside. The junior lawyer tried to sound older. Independent appraisals can't authorize breaches, Leonard finished for him, still gentle. Boilerplate can be handsome, it cannot be sovereign. Rain thickened. The heater kicked. Lily's pen made 3 quiet strokes: time, clause, sequence. I picked up the Bluetooth speaker and flipped the switch. A tiny light woke, the way a pilot light does. We're going to set context, I said, and glanced at my mother so she wouldn't flinch at the word we. Short clip. Mason pressed play on my phone and set it beside the speaker. Ethan's voice came out of the small box as if he had crawled in there himself to make sure everyone heard his best angles. Countdown 3, 2, 1, post. Place a counter order. The room went very still, the way rooms do when a head hits water and doesn't surface right away. Leonard let the beat stretch just long enough to fix the edges. Then he switched the speaker off and nodded toward Lily. She slid a black and white printout forward, the yellow highlight a band of daylight across gray. I did not read the sentence aloud. It read itself, in my brother's cadence, across each face at the table. No one said anything for a few seconds. Even the rain seemed to forget its job. Ethan broke first, not with a shout, but with a scoff meant to pass for amusement. "Are you going to jail your brother?" he asked, jumping to his feet like spring steel misjudged. He spread his arms toward my parents, a stage he never seems to leave.
Is that the plan? You get your little gotcha
And march him into a building with fluorescent lights because you want to feel principled. Leonard didn't rise. He didn't blink more than usual. I protect the client. Whoever manipulates, the regulator cares. He slid a single-page cover letter across the wood, the kind that looks almost blank until you notice the male-stamped edges and the 4 hard nouns that matter. We document. We report. We don't dramatize. My mother had her napkin in both hands, twisting it into a soft rope. "Ethan," she said, voice pitched to soothe the crowd. "Sit. We can talk like—" "We've talked," I said. Not loud, not sharp. And the napkin uncoiled as if she'd remembered it was only cloth. I looked at my brother until he had to decide whether to look back. From today, no signing, no bailout, no negotiating in the dark. He laughed again, but it was a smaller sound, bitten off at the end. "You think a press release and a parlor trick make you bulletproof?" "I think terms make us grounded," Mason said. "Bullets miss what doesn't flinch." Ethan's jaw set in a way that used to scare me when we were children, because it meant he was about to win at something I didn't know we were playing. He reached for the appraisal, then pulled his hand back as though the paper had teeth. The junior lawyer tugged at his sleeve, a reminder built into fabric. My father stared at the speaker as if it might start again and save him from choosing. The rain found a rhythm and kept it. Lily set her pen down. "Noted," she said, mostly to herself, and capped the ink. My phone lit the table from below, a square of light up through wood grain. The subject line populated before the preview could catch up, an institutional phrasing that doesn't bother with personality. Email jumps to formal exchange at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the local office. The timestamp stamped itself. The loop closed.
Dad hoarsely, "Are you sure?"
Me. More sure than ever. I used to tremble for their recognition. Today, I don't need them anymore. I need the law and the ground. The morning room at the local agency was built for folding chairs and fluorescent honesty. White walls, a clock that ticked audibly, a table with legs that wobbled unless you knew where to press. I set my tote down and slid an envelope to one side, the old Thanksgiving photo face down, the paper thinning at the corners where my thumb had learned it. Mason placed a sticky note in my palm like a coin. Respect over revenge, in his steady block letters. I smoothed it against my skin until the ink felt warm. Leonard laid out the timeline in neat strata, dates like mile markers on a highway, each one annotated with receipts. I set the voice note on the table beside a small speaker, and the investigator nodded once before I pressed play. The familiar chuckle bled into the room. Countdown 3, 2, 1, post. Place a counter order. And then the clip ended cleanly, the silence afterward telling its own truth. I handed over the screenshots, the blog headline, the scraped copy, the town group comments tucked around a link like burrs. The weak cease and desist followed, printed on good paper that tried to make up for its lack of spine. Leonard added the grant pages and that single highlighted line, no encumbrance, no transfer. And with it, the pilot contract and the cover letters stamped as if by a machine that respected time. The investigator's pen clicked and stopped, clicked and stopped. "You're seeking what outcome?" she asked, not unkindly, only as someone who needs nouns in the right places. "I'm not asking for punishment," I said. "I'm asking for respect for the law." My voice surprised me by being level. I pointed to the stack. "These are the rules we agreed to before any of this was interesting enough to post about. I want them honored." Out loud, Leonard slid the reporting index forward as if in answer. The investigator read until her brow softened. She asked for copies, and I gave them without conditions. When she pushed the small recorder closer for an official statement, I repeated the same sentence. It sounded the same. That was a kind of relief. In the hallway, the tile carried all sound too far. Mason touched my shoulder with 2 fingers, a pulse that found my breath and steadied it. Lily waited on a bench with 2 coffees and a list of what we'd handed over, each line followed by a small square neatly checked. She looked younger in that light, and older in the eyes, as if this kind of morning draws years the way the sun draws water. We sat until the clock said we'd done enough sitting. By noon, the rain had cleaned itself out of the sky. On the way home, my phone buzzed with an email from Ethan's attorney, a milder cousin to last night's bravado. Language like resolving misunderstandings, a suggestion of media reconciliation. Leonard read over my shoulder and answered with 14 keystrokes that landed like a palm against a door. "Start with a public correction." He sent it and didn't look to see whether it bounced. Some messages are addressed to the act of sending, not the person on the other end. Afternoon light found the wood at the crossing and turned sawdust golden in the air. The gate was half built, 2 posts anchored deep, crossbeam ready to lift. Kenny showed up with a drill on his lap and a grin that decided the weather for everyone. Tom brought a level and an opinion on grain direction. Children orbited the work like bright planets. Lily stapled a plain paper sign that read Community Workday in letters so tidy they commanded courtesy. We measured and lifted and held. The heft of the beam went through my bones and into the ground, as if the earth could feel our intent and approve it. Mason called out numbers. I answered back. For once, the math in my life fit in my body. When the crossbeam settled on its bolts, we took a breath as a group. I reached into my bag, pulled the envelope, and let the old photo slide into my hand. The frame with the gap where my husband should have been. I looked at it long enough to memorize the absence again, then slid it back and replaced it with a larger mat board, the new photo, in colors that felt honest, 100 small imperfections and 1 perfect center. Mason stood in the middle of that frame, shoulders even, eyes laughing at somebody I couldn't see in the crop. Around him, Kenny's cap, Tom's level, Lily's smile half caught, my hand on the corner of the sign. I hooked the wire and felt the picture find its balance on the nail. It hung there like a verdict delivered without shouting. My parents arrived as the shadows stretched thin, their footsteps slowing when the gravel gave way to grass. Mom stood at the threshold of the gate like a woman waiting for permission at a door she'd never learned to open for herself. Dad removed his hat, not because anyone told him to, but because some rooms insist on dignity even when they're open sky. Nobody forced ceremony, so the moment came on its own legs. Mom stepped forward and reached for the frame with the damp little breath of someone touching an heirloom. Her fingers didn't tremble so much as correct themselves, as if trying to retrain a habit. She pressed the glass lightly and spoke to it, or to me through it. "I'm sorry for leaving you out of the frame." The sentence was smaller than the hurt had been, but it was whole. I put my arms around her without collapsing into them. We stood like women who had work left to do after this hug, and then we let go. Dad turned to Mason and held out his hand like something rare he'd cleaned and brought from home. "You did the right thing." Mason took it with the kind of firmness that isn't about strength. The grip lasted a second longer than those gestures usually do, just long enough to nudge a line a fraction in the right direction. We ate cornbread out of paper napkins, and someone passed a jar of nails like it was a cookie tin. Kenny told a story about another gate years ago. Tom corrected the measurements in the story, and everyone laughed, even me. The air cooled in the soft way that means real night is coming. Not a threat, but a truth. I stood back and looked at the sign. The crossing. The letters carved by two neighbors who had never asked what we were building until we asked them to help. Beyond the gate, the first plot beds shaped a path that would soon smell like thyme and wet bark. For a second, I almost wished there was an audience that would clap at the right time. Then Mason leaned on the post beside me, and the urge evaporated. My phone vibrates. Notice of review initiation sent to Ethan's company. A small item that said, "Temporarily cut the overdraft limit from the bank." Lily whispered, "His wife took the child back to her parents' house." Mason looked at me. "Let the law do the rest." I nodded, turning to the gate. "Cut the ribbon." As the ribbon lifted at the crossing, the smear machine sputtered out. His valuation boomeranged off a single non-transfer line. The voice note detonated, and the review notice landed while they stood centered in the frame he once cut them from. The pretender to power blinked under studio lights. The real power sat on paper, terms, timestamps, and a trail of receipts. When betrayal shouts the loudest, justice sharpens its quietest blade. The moment they felt safest was the exact edge of their fall. In the end, respect, not revenge, rewrote the script. And when the dust settled, the door didn't politely open. Truth filed, stamped, and came through anyway. Because no throne of numbers outruns the bedrock of law and truth. Unhurried, always arrives armed.